That is the number for Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Make sure you call them today. All right, we told you this a moment ago. We were going to be in the midst of kind of a little bit looser format than we typically are because we know that Georgia is at SEC Media Days right now. We have an example of that here in a moment. I've got some breaking news. Actually, let me just go ahead and do this. We'll jump into this now. Let's go into Around the DawgHouse here right now on our program here today. We'll go ahead and dive into the Around the DawgHouse part of all of this. I'll give you an update in a moment, too, on the big contest we're running right now. Let me go ahead and dive into this news. I'm going to give credit to one of our commenters who had this like a month ago. And I joked about this yesterday. So I don't it's always tricky about which rumors you kind of get into, which rumors you don't. But we had a commenter the other day, like this has been like 3 weeks, a month ago, who had kind of called his shot on this, and turns out that he was truthful. Story Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com, this just breaking here a moment ago, that Kirby Smart has announced that transfer Dion Smoke Bouie is not going to return to the team here for the upcoming season. Here's the quote from Smart. Smoke is no longer with our team. It's been that way for a while. We kind of mutually agreed to part ways, and we wish him nothing but the best. He goes on to say another quote here from Kirby Smart. This you can read the full story at DawgNation.com. And I'm sorry I don't have this on the screen for you, but this just came out a moment ago. It's very disappointing that his stay was short, but it was a decision that was made by both parties. And like I said, we wish him nothing but the best. He's from the hometown where I'm from, obviously talking about Bainbridge, Georgia. We know a lot of people back there. It was a decision that was made. So this story coming out at DawgNation.com, the new look DawgNation.com. You can go there. You can read that. You can find out more about that there. Smoke Bouie no longer with the team. There had been some rumors about this, as I said before. This had been discussed in our comment section 4 weeks ago, a month ago. Somebody kind of had that in there. So there had been some chatter sort of about that. And here's what I'll tell you about this. Do I think this is a gamble worth taking? Totally do. Totally do. I think that Smoke Bouie's a pretty good talent. I think that when you go into the transfer portal for a player, you are acknowledging some risk for, kind of bringing him into your roster, because let's sort of acknowledge something, that if things were perfect with the player, perfect with the situation, the player would not be transferring. Can we just acknowledge that? That doesn't make transferring bad, but it does make the situation imperfect. Otherwise, the player would have no interest in leaving his other school. And, when Georgia went down the road of Dion Bouie after having been at Texas A&M, there's some chatter about what A&M was a year ago, the locker room culture there with that program. There were some questions being asked of, if you're Georgia, are you sure that you want to go down this road? Are you sure you want to do this? You sure you want to bring him in to your culture here? And after essentially a few weeks on the team, that's apparently not worked out. My answer to this is, I don't know if y'all agree with this or not, but I'm fairly confident this is the right way to look at this. My answer to this is just sort of a shrug. Oh, well, you tried it, didn't quite work out. Because when your overall culture is strong enough, and I believe that Georgia's is, then you can try something. You can see how it works. You can't have there's a certain tipping point with your roster where if you've got too many guys, and that I'm guessing is somewhere around 10 to 15%, something like that. If you've got too many guys who are sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out the door, then you can't build a team, right? You can't develop the connective tissue that Kirby Smart wants to have. You can't do that. If you've got a certain percentage of your roster who's sort of looking around for, I don't even know what, in the case of Bouie, I'm not sure what he wants for his next chapter here. But if you've got a certain percentage of your roster who's sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you can't build a team that way. You just can't. But can you try to take a risk on this guy, take a risk on that guy, and if it doesn't work out, can you sort of shake that off and move on? I think you probably can. That's what Georgia tried with Reed Gilbert, we'd say that. And the Gilbert situation, I'm assuming, is different than the Bouie situation. But once again, it's worth taking the risk on a talented player because the actual risk itself is pretty small. Georgia tried it with Gilbert, didn't quite work out. It was always tempting because of how obviously talented he was. Gilbert was one of the best high school players I've probably ever seen, to be honest with you. I mean, he's really, really a very good high school player. He's had a hard time because of some personal issues that he's dealt with. We've covered this in great detail. He's had a hard time kind of finding a way to to sort of live up to that potential at the college level, but it was worth trying, and it didn't quite work out. I think both parties shook hands and said we gave it our best shot, and Gilbert's moved on. We wish him well there at Nebraska. Completely different situation because all situations are unique to their own specific circumstances. Completely different situation with Deon Buie. You gave that a shot. It is clearly not worked out because pretty unusual to have a guy leave so quickly after having really kind of just gotten here, but a talented player. Always kind of intriguing because he was from Bainbridge, Kirby Smart's hometown. That made Deon somewhat popular as a recruit just because of the symmetry of all that. People kind of like the idea of that. And he's, once again, obviously a very talented guy. We'd said before on here that if he'd been on this roster, we thought he'd been competitive for playing time. And potentially this is a guy you could play at a number of different positions. I mean, Bowie, talented enough. You could have tried him here. You could have tried him there. You could have tried him a lot of different places in that defensive secondary. But ultimately, just didn't quite work out. And honestly, I just think the proper response to all this is kind of a shrug. Oh, well. Worth a shot. Certainly the preseason expectations for Georgia don't change because of Deon Bowie's departure here right now. That's just not the way that it is. And in terms of some sort of reputational risk here of does it make Georgia look bad? The guy like this came in and didn't stay very long. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters really whatsoever. The one thing that has been really interesting to me about Kirby Smart, because Kirby Smart, I would say, is a pretty rigid guy, right? This is a guy that football should be played this way. Our standard of behavior needs to be this way. There's a certain unwavering commitment that Kirby Smart has to a few ideals. But in this new age in which we live in, Kirby Smart, I think, has forced to become a little bit more practical. I'll give you an example of this. The other day, we had a quote from Kirby, and I forget where he said it. I think it may have been at SEC spring meetings. I honestly don't remember. But he said something to the effect of, when we bring in guys out of high school, our goal is to keep 70% of them. That, to me, is a pretty interesting admission from Kirby Smart that on a best-case scenario, Georgia, over the course of the long haul, doesn't have much of a chance of keeping more than 2 out of every 3 players they sign out of high school. That the best-case scenario is to do slightly better than that. All the guys we sign, we hope to keep 2 out of every 3. That 1 out of every 3 almost is going to somehow fall through the cracks, go somewhere else, whatever else. We're not going to be able to keep that player. That's a pretty practical reality that Kirby Smart has seemed to confront. He seems to be confronting that openly and with open eyes and willing to do that. So if there's a practical reality when it comes to players you recruit out of high school, you can't keep them all. If you can keep 70% of them, you've done pretty well. Smart has said that. If that's the reality that must be confronted on the guys you bring in out of high school, there's also going to be a certain reality you have to confront about the guys that you bring in out of the transfer portal. They're not all going to work out. The kind of scouting you can do on a transfer may be more limited than the kind of scouting you can do on a high school guy that you've had long-term relationship with. You're going to have to take some risks. You're going to have to take some flyers. And sometimes the guy you bring in turns out to be J.R. Reed. And sometimes the guy you bring in turns out to be, who's the defensive lineman they brought in from Notre Dame that I don't think hardly ever played. I mean, there's just going to be a gamut of a wide spectrum of achievement for transfer players you bring in. Some are going to be players you're really glad to have. Some are going to be players you forget were even on the roster. And you just sort of roll the dice. You take the good with the bad. So the Bowie thing happened. We'll get some headlines within DawgNation. I don't think the rest of the college football world, the regional media, the SEC media on hand for all of this, I don't think they will pay much attention to this whatsoever. Georgia went after a guy they recruited pretty hard coming out of high school, went to Texas A&M for a year, transferred to Georgia, did not work out. It's obviously a little strange that a guy like that would leave so quickly, but Georgia moves on, and I guess, if Kirby Smart wishes Bowie well with his next chapter, I guess we will do the same thing with all of that there as well. We'll make that around the DawgHouse here, too. I want to do a lot more on Georgia and SEC media days. We're obviously in a little bit of a different type of, kind of a cadence today on the show just because a lot of this is happening while we're doing it. Let me break this up, though, for 1 second to remind you about a really fun contest ongoing at DawgNation.com here right now. We are celebrating our teachers courtesy of our friends at Kroger, and this back-to-school season really arrived. I mean, you start to having dinner the night at a restaurant, and the TV on in the restaurant, and I pointed to my kids and said, hey, I got bad news for y'all. The back-to-school TV commercials have started back again. That's a signal that school is on its way back here, but it's a good thing for us because we get a chance to celebrate some outstanding teachers who are a part of our audience. We want to give you a chance to be a part of this there, too, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. And what's really fun about this is that not only do our teachers who are nominated have a chance to win, the nominator, him or herself, also has a chance to win there as well. Our nominators can win a $50 Kroger gift card, a DawgNation gift bag as well, which has all kinds of cool stuff, including t-shirt, things like that. So we have gifts for the nominators here that we're going to be announcing, which is really fun. But the actual teachers themselves, who are Outstanding Teachers winners, how about the great collection of gift cards they get a chance to win? $50 to Target, and a Home Chef, and a Bath & Body Works, and, of course, $100 from Kroger there as well. Total value on those gift cards, $250. This is an incredible thing. So we got the submission period ongoing right now, and then we're going to announce the winners the week of August 7th through the 11th. So go to DawgNation.com right now, nominate a great teacher that you know about, great teacher there in your life, in your kid's school, or just a teacher that you know is doing great things. That teacher could be a really big winner of an incredible collection of gift cards, 4 different terrific gift cards, and you could also win a prize there yourself just for nominating this wonderful teacher. So all the details available online at DawgNation.com, and it's very simple right there at the website to click in and make your nomination. So do that today, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. So what has happened thus far in Nashville, Tennessee, where SEC Media Days is ongoing, is that Georgia typically has a little bit of a smaller meeting with a small handful of, like the Georgia, like our buddy Mike Griffith and the Georgia sort of media contingent. And the reason why they do this is because in the big room, if you ever watch this in the SEC network, like that is not always the most distinguished body. There's a lot of people in there, and there's no telling what question you might get. So if you want to know, injury status on this player, the status of a Smoke Bouie, some of those things that have kind of been lingering and out there for a little while. If you want to know stuff like that, you're really not going to get a chance to really ask all of those questions in an SEC Media Days big auditorium room setting. There's just not enough time. There's, no telling who gets to ask a question. It's, somebody from, whatever. And you don't get the best information the Georgia fans want. So Georgia always kind enough to sort of do some very UGA-centric questions, like the drill-down stuff on injuries, like really, really granular, specific information type questions with the UGA media contingent, prior to the main sort of media day setup. But eventually we will hear from Kirby Smart on the podium. And I guess one of the things that I'm sort of, curious about here a little bit is, what it is that Smart says, and if there's some sort of like money quote you can kind of pull out of Kirby on this, because after all, it was, a year ago that I thought that Kirby Smart delivered one of the strongest statements not only have I ever heard him deliver, but one of the strongest statements I'd really heard from any defending national champion. That, as I said before, when we were talking about the stuff that Brian Kelly said, there's a natural tendency to kind of want to be a little bit understated in a media day setting where you kind of want to sort of get in, get out, and just sort of get it over with. I'm sure it's not very fun for the coaches and players who have to go through this. It's a long day for them, longer than you might realize. And so there's a temptation to just want to say nothing, get it over with, and move on. But Kirby Smart, if he's going to have the big platform like that, the microphone's in his face, the camera's in his face, he's going to use that opportunity to sort of say something, to sort of deliver some sort of message. And he really laid the groundwork this time a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, for the mission that became Go for Two in 22. I love what he said then. It's a reminder that he may say something just as interesting today. Let's hear last year and wonder, could this be a preview of maybe more of the same here for this year? This is Kirby Smart.
I've done the rounds this morning. I'll bet you at least 50 people have asked me the question. So feel free when we open up for questions to ask me the concern there is for complacency. That does not concern me in the least, because to be complacent, you have to have done something and achieved something. The men on this team for this season have not done that. They have not. We have 15 players that are now gone to NFL camps or draft picks. They're gone. And we have some returning players, but they're hungry as ever. People have asked the question, how does it feel to be hunted? We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that. The hunting that we do will be done from us going the other direction. It's not something we're going to sit back and be passive about.
So I think that's an incredibly strong statement, and it turned out to be true. And obviously that became a very big part of Kirby Smart's overall messaging, because he said that a lot. I mean, if you watch that Them Dogs documentary on SEC Network last night. He kind of alluded to that in one of the comments that he made that got used on that show too. The whole idea of we're going to be the hunters, we're not going to allow ourselves to be hunted. That was something that Smart said a year ago, and I think it became a really strong theme for Georgia throughout the 2022 season, and ultimately, I think, helped be part of the motivation that allowed them to win the SEC championship and the national championship, obviously, there as well. So as I'm recording this, we're still on a Tuesday morning. We'll hear from Kirby Smart at the podium a little bit later on. You kind of wonder, does Smart once again this year make a statement just as forceful? Does he have words that are once again just as strong? Because I believe, and once again, if you watched that Them Dogs documentary on SEC Network last night, you saw this. I believe that Kirby Smart is fully aware of something we mentioned to begin our show today. There is a moment and an opportunity that exists for Georgia to build on the edge and advantage they have over the rest of college football, to take advantage of their success and leverage that for even more success. That's the kind of thing that I think that Kirby Smart is very, very well aware of. It's the kind of thing I think that he really much understands. And so seeing what he does today to kind of cast that vision, using the words, I'm sure that they'll be carefully chosen by him to really sort of establish that. I do think that will be a pretty interesting thing to see. So let me just kind of, I guess, sort of recap, reset this, and then after that we'll kind of move on here. The big news coming out of SEC Media Days here thus far is that Smoke Bouie, kind of confirming some rumors that have been out there, Smoke Bouie no longer with the Georgia team. Kirby Smart saying in a story you can read at DawgNation.com, there was a mutual decision to part ways here. There'll be more news that comes out as Georgia sort of makes its rounds throughout the day. Really, they're in Nashville sort of just getting going. That is the news on tap. We'll continue to follow that. Stay close to DawgNation. I thought last night Connor Riley, Mike Griffith did a good job of kind of recapping the day on video. I'm sure they'll do more of that here today there as well. DawgNation all over SEC Media Day. So make sure you follow all of that as Georgia coaches and Georgia coach Kirby Smart make plenty of news there in Nashville.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, so we are certainly looking forward to all of that SEC Media Days rolling on, and obviously for a lot of folks kind of getting out of summer vacation mode, getting ready to start the upcoming season. But there are also some folks who are still in that kind of vacation mode there as well. I told you yesterday, our buddy John Stinchcomb, he's enjoying a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation right now. I love to think about that, and I love the fact that so many of you have enjoyed your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacations there as well. And I just really appreciate the fact that when you do, a lot of you kind of shout out to me and say, hey, BA, I'm taking that Royal Caribbean cruise. I'm really, really glad that you are. And I hope that all of you can make plans to join us for our third DawgNation cruise coming up in April of 2024. It's going to be the 22nd through the 26th of April. We're going to be leaving out of Port Canaveral, as we always have. That's kind of what I think of as my home port. It's the port closest to me. You just drive from Atlanta, just past Orlando. You're essentially there at Port Canaveral. We're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. We're going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. We've done that before. But this year, in April of 2024, the DawgNation cruise is going to be bigger and better than it's ever been before because we're going to be on one of the largest cruise ships ever constructed. I'm talking about Allure of the Seas, one of those Oasis class of ships. That means more specialty restaurants, more bars, more entertainment, more fun to be had, and to kind of match the size and scope of the event, more specially themed DawgNation events there as well. We're going to be showing you a lot of the stuff via video that we did on our most recent DawgNation cruise. I was so proud of how that turned out, so proud of the fun we had on board with the hundreds of folks who joined us for our last DawgNation cruise, and really, really excited about the kind of fun still left to be enjoyed here in April of 2024 there as well. So Jessica Slater is a great travel agent. She is the one specially selected by Royal Caribbean to help us plan and make sure it all runs smoothly for our DawgNation cruise. So check out the website she's put together. It's royaldogs.com. That is royaldogs.com. And you can be a part of the DawgNation cruise coming up in April of 2024. We hope to see you there. All right, I want to give you a couple of notes here from some of the other stuff that kind of went down at SEC Media Days. Both expected to happen today, did happen yesterday. Kind of lay the groundwork for what is kind of the unofficial start to the 2023 season. I thought that SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, we lost our music there. There, we're back. Thought that SEC Commissioner Greg, bring it down just a little bit if you don't mind. Thought that SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey had some interesting things to say yesterday, kind of confirming that for now the SEC is focused on keeping its SEC championship game in Atlanta. There had been some chatter about this because Nashville, who's hosting Media Days here this week, building a new stadium there as well. They're in contention. It's going to have a retractable roof. They're going to be in contention for future Final Fours and things like that. And I think there's some hope and thought there in the Nashville business community that could also become a player in the future for the SEC championship game. After all, Nashville, a big part of the SEC footprint. It's a growing city. It's a major tourist destination. Everything kind of in place there for the idea that it could be, a part of the SEC's future for championship games, things like that. Sankey yesterday, though, not really mincing words at all about the idea that for now the SEC is focused solely on Atlanta and the Mercedes-Benz Stadium as a future site for its championship games. So a pretty interesting statement from Sankey about how clear and unmistakable that was, that for now they're only looking at Atlanta as a site for the championship game. That's probably an advantage for Georgia, obviously. Georgia's gotten very comfortable as of late playing at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Also interesting, and for the most part, this is a media thing, not a fan thing, but it was announced by Sankey yesterday that SEC Media Days next year are going to be in Dallas. And that's probably the first example that we have of the SEC now just having a larger geographic footprint. One of the things that Sankey likes to brag about is the fact that the SEC's expansion has always been, to use a fancy word here, kind of contiguous, meaning that they take on states that touch other SEC states. When you brought in Missouri, you're bringing in a state that touches Arkansas. When you bring in Texas A&M, you're bringing in a state that touches Louisiana. When you bring in Oklahoma, you're bringing in a state that touches Texas. Austin's obviously only a few miles down the road from College Station. That, I think from Sankey's point of view here, whether it matters or not, that the SEC expansion has been a little bit more reasonable and a little bit more measured than maybe the Big Ten sort of, hungry hippo style of grab this from New Jersey, grab that from L.A., grab this from Maryland. That the SEC's expansion has been a little bit more dignified, I think that Sankey might say. I don't think that fans care about this, but I do think you will see this moving forward where it just sort of has to be acknowledged that this league is now not quite so Southeast anymore. It's still the SEC, but I heard this sort of, I guess, boardroom thing the other day where, they kind of kicked around the idea that in the future they may just be called the SEC, sort of like if you're a pro wrestling fan, Hunter Hearst Helmsley eventually just became Triple H. The H's didn't stand for anything anymore. That the SEC may one day be just the SEC, and the idea of it being the Southeastern Conference may kind of go by the wayside. It'll just be the letters that matter, because when you've got Norman, Oklahoma, and Austin, Texas, and Columbia, Missouri, you're not quite so Southeastern anymore. So next year, Media Days being in Dallas, I guess, is an example maybe of that. Sankey also talked a little bit about the idea of congressional involvement to kind of level the playing field for NIL. I think it's way too early to tell where any of that's going. And, right now it seems like the water's on that kind of stuff as muddy as they ever were with the kind of sort of catch-as-catch-can style of NIL laws that seem to be in place in the various states there on that. I thought it was interesting to see Jimbo Fisher yesterday, the Texas A&M coach. Jimbo, if you watched his podium thing when he was in front of the larger room there, to me overall, it may have been the single most interesting moment of the day because it was the closest we had to anything combative, and I think it was Jimbo himself. And we would say that Jimbo's got a little bit of a temper, right? You'd sort of say that Jimbo's a little hot-headed from time to time, and he had to know questions about Bobby Petrino were coming and the working relationship he'd have with Bobby Petrino. He'd have to know those questions were coming. In fact, if you were any kind of PR person, SID type person, that's, of course, the number one issue you'd prepare a guy like Fisher to talk about. And yet when those questions came, Fisher still sort of struck a little bit of a defensive tone about all of that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Would not fully acknowledge that Bobby Petrino is there to call the plays. He obviously said that Petrino's here for a reason, but he wouldn't fully articulate what that reason was. That Petrino's here to fix an offense that was broken with Jimbo Fisher leading it. Jimbo Fisher just did not want to acknowledge that. Most people with power don't relinquish power voluntarily, and this seems to be an example of that whether it contributes to wins or not, the power that Jimbo Fisher has had over the Texas A&M program, he is not that excited about letting any of that go. The behavior in terms of how he talked about Petrino yesterday, kind of an example of that. He also kind of openly acknowledged the fact they need to win more games. So this was probably our first moment of, it wasn't quite combative, that's the wrong word, but in terms of questions that a coach didn't want to answer, a little bit of pushback to that, just a little bit of spiciness involving Jimbo Fisher in the media yesterday. I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, today, while Georgia is at media days, the only other real coach of note, you got Zach Arnett making his media days debut at Mississippi State. That's obviously a continuing sad story, the death of Mike Leach. And yesterday, Greg Sankey opened up SEC media days by paying tribute to Leach. It's kind of a nice thing to see and a nice thing for Sankey to do. Arnett is there today, kind of talk about what's next for the Bulldogs. No easy feat. Clark Lee, probably better than you realized last year for Vanderbilt. He'll get very little attention to be spoken of at SEC media days there too. But in the shadow of Kirby Smart is Auburn. Auburn there the same day that Georgia is. And first-year coach, not first year in the SEC, but first year in Auburn, Hugh Freeze is there. And I don't quite know what to expect from Freeze here. I do believe that Freeze will be better trained to answer the questions than maybe Fisher was yesterday. I think that Freeze has probably been told to be on guard for anything. I think that Freeze is also, and this is, I think, probably to his credit, although very few people want to give him credit for anything, and some of that's probably understandably so. But to his credit, I think that Freeze has learned to be pretty contrite. I think that Freeze has sort of learned to kind of take his medicine for some of the bad things he did, some of the bad things he was alleged to have done, some of the weird things he did maybe too, in addition to outright bad stuff. And I think the Freeze is just sort of content to own that and let the people have their say about him and realize that the only real way he can kind of change his reputation is by what happens on the field here coming up this fall. So I think you got the potential for fireworks with Freeze being back in the SEC, but ultimately I'm guessing, knowing there had to be a moment for Hugh Freeze when he wondered would he ever be back coaching the SEC again. He had to have wondered that. And now that he is, my guess is he is grateful enough for this opportunity that he's not going to let his own words mess any of that up. In other words, given the chance to be forceful and combative the way that kind of a sugar-free version of kind of what you got from Jimbo Fisher yesterday, my guess is Hugh Freeze probably sidesteps some of that, but that's the other somewhat interesting thing happening today at SEC Media Day. So we'll be following that as Georgia kind of rolls on here. And as I said before, don't forget, DawgNation's kind of got wall-to-wall coverage of this. Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, they are both in Nashville. We'll have video of them. We'll share some of the clips and stuff on the show tomorrow. You can also read every word of this on the brand new, better than ever before, refreshed and designed version of DawgNation.com. Make sure you check that out for all of your UGA at SEC Media Days. Coverage will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So a little bit different kind of show for us. As I said before, we're kind of in the midst of Georgia Media Days. We knew something would come out. We thought the Bouie thing might be it. It was. And so there you go. There'll be more injury stuff, things like that. Stay close to DawgNation.com on all of that. By the way, let's do our golden shoe here. I'm always appreciative when some of the folks in our audience are kind enough to sort of shout out some of our great sponsors. So George Foster, former Georgia offensive lineman, was having some fun with a guy on Twitter who showed off his air conditioning, which apparently is not working. 98 degrees. How about that? That's very hot inside a house. Guy says, help. George Foster says, you're going to stand up and fall right off the bone, which is kind of a funny thing to say as you're kind of roasting somebody on the inside of the house there. And then Georgia on Tap shared this with me and said, hey, this guy's got to call R.S. Andrews stat. So I appreciate Georgia on Tap shouting out a great sponsor of ours, R.S. Andrews. We'll give golden shoes all the way around for that. We'll also let you know, Gator Hater Countdown, Lousy Stinking Gators, 102 days from right now. Georgia is back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. We know that's going to happen, and that's a fun thing to think about, our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you all back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, I've got this fresh in my hands, hot off the press here, as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here. Some injury updates. Two of these, Smile Mondin, Branson Robbins, we've been watching pretty closely. Kirby Smart saying a moment ago, this is Connor Riley at DawgNation.com, that neither will be, quote, full go to start camp. So let's give you this here. Smile Mondin, not ready. That's not unexpected news. Branson Robbins, kind of the same thing. Mikael Williams will be ready. Kendall Milton, 100% expected by camp. Dejon Edwards, the same way. Andrew Paul, expected to be cleared by camp. Now, that's an interesting phrasing there, because remember what Kirby Smart said about Paul in the spring, that he was at that point at about the same place that Nick Chubb was in the spring after his horrific knee injury back in 2015. Now, this is a lot of reading between the lines, and maybe some of that's too much reading between the lines. I'll be very, very fair to acknowledge this with you. But that would lead you to believe that the injury that Paul must have suffered must have been pretty serious, as even being compared to Chubb, because we know the Chubb injury in 2015 would have been very, very serious. And we also know that the Chubb we got in 2016 was not the same Nick Chubb we saw in 2017. Nick Chubb's the best running back alive right now, and yet in 2016, a year removed from his, from his knee injury, that was not the same caliber of running back it would be another year later. So that would lead me to want to temper my expectations for Andrew Paul just a little bit for this upcoming year. Cleared to participate in camp, eligible to play, but a version of himself that may not be as healthy as he was prior to the injury, and also maybe not as healthy as he will be another year from now. Just keep that in mind. Jalen Walker expected to be ready for camp. Marvin Jones Jr. expected to be ready for camp. And Dan Jackson expected to be ready for camp. So I think you take that as pretty much what we expected it to be. This is pretty much where all this is going. All of those like myriad shoulder injuries from the spring, we see Georgia have a ton of those seemingly every year. Almost all of them are kind of just sort of paint by numbers, right? It's like it all kind of plays out exactly, as it's supposed to play out. You have the surgery in the winter, you miss the spring, by the fall you're a wrecking crew again. That's Roquan Smith, that's Nakobe Dean, that's Brock Bauer. Like a lot of these guys who sort of had that spring miss because of a minor shoulder injury, by the fall they're typically ready to go. But we've had some indication now for a little while that the timelines on a Smile Monin injury, a little bit different kind of thing, Branson Robinson, a little bit different kind of thing. We had some indication that those injuries were going to kind of drag a little bit different timeline, a little bit more of a delayed timeline. So let me read a couple quotes here from Kirby Smart. It says, I don't know how long it'll be, but they will not be full go on practice one. They'll be able to run what we call dry landing running the next stage. They'll be dry land running, but they won't be full go in practice. We're going to go through a little bit slower ramp-up process with both of them. He means Robinson and Monin, I believe. They're both dealing with significant injuries. We're hopeful to get them back, but I don't know when that will be in terms of full speed. I'm not trying to laugh about the injury situation, but there's no bigger kiss of death out there than the whole Kirby Smart, we're hopeful to get them back type thing. We've heard that, obviously, a lot of times before. But this is sort of what I think a lot of us have been on guard for a little while here, that Monin and Robinson were going to be on a little bit different timeline than the others on the injury situation. So there you go on that. I'll also tell you, I cannot go long on comments today. We have some stuff away from the show got to kind of deal with here a little bit. But we did go crazy long yesterday. So yesterday may have been the longest we've ever gone. So there you go there on that. So we'll do short today and get back to the full business there tomorrow. All right. On YouTube here for a moment. Let's see how folks are doing. This is the cool down. Yeah, no, we did the cool down. We're in the cool down now. We said ain't on a video. We're in the cool down now. All right, let's see what else. Frank Patterson says, did you see where UGA has 5 preseason All-SEC on offense? Listen, this has a chance to be a very special offensive team for sure. Jerry Dogfan says Nick Chubb is the standard, the greatest running back alive right now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Cheat Grace Bampa Boy says, I know who the best running back is. I watch the games. Baggins and Friends says he just got back from a Royal Caribbean cruise. Baggins, I'm glad to have you back on the show. Hope you had a great time on the cruise. You have to tell us more about your experience. That's really nice. Really nice. Let's see what else. B.A. Style, Stone Cold Style. He's in there having fun, which I'd love to see. Scott Harris and Christy talking about snakes on the roof. Boy, I don't know if I can mess with some of that now. I don't like snakes. Paul Moon says 11 o'clock, I say we're going to be short today. And then 11:43, I say let's see what else. This is one of those days where I really, have to be kind of quick here. So I apologize for that. Crow King 123 says, here's hoping that Edwards and Milton are 100% healthy, and we just, have an indication they probably are. And listen, I think it can be a really good year for both those guys, for sure. Thomas Dyson, the subject of of the TV market size mattering when it comes to a lot of the stuff that's going to happen with the business decisions. So pretty clearly in the past, that was the main thing driving conference expansion was the SEC wanted Missouri because Missouri brought 2 really large cable markets with it. It brought St. Louis and Kansas City, relatively large cities. Bringing them into the SEC footprint made it easier to get, good coverage for the SEC network, things like that. Texas A&M kind of brings in Houston and to a certain extent Dallas. You kind of bring in, those big markets there as well. We're kind of post-cable bundle world, though, even though I still subscribe to cable. To me, for my family, it's still a pretty good deal. It's not a great deal for everybody, but for my family, it probably still is. So we're kind of in the post-cable bundle world for a lot of people. And I think now we're kind of in an age in which it's just total number of eyeballs that probably matter. And that's why conference expansion in the future is pretty difficult to predict because, like you would think, well, the SEC would love to have Florida State. The SEC would love to have Clemson. But how many more total eyeballs on the product does a school like that bring in? I've always said that it's a lot easier to imagine a Florida State or a Clemson being a no-brainer for the Big Ten because that gets the Big Ten into the South. Whereas it doesn't seem as much of a total no-brainer for me, but it certainly could be. And maybe the SEC wants them to keep the Big Ten from getting them or whatever else. It's also, not obvious that the ACC contract is going to be able to be broken anytime soon. The point is that conference expansion used to be fairly easy to predict because you just looked at who could gain some ground in sort of the TV footprint, kind of cable viewing landscape world, and in kind of a non-cable world where in some form or fashion, some sort of streaming thing is a part of the football future. I think some of the streaming stuff around football may be slowing down just a little bit. If you listen to some of the stuff that Bob Iger said recently, the Disney CEO, but I mean, I'm talking about slowing down just slightly. But the point is that in a world in which the cable bundle doesn't specifically dominate the revenue discussion, I think the idea of what's next for conference expansion is a little bit difficult to predict. There's an update on quarterbacks. All right, let's see if I can pull this up here. Let's see if I can find this. Update on the quarterbacks. Let's see if we got something here. I don't see it just as of yet. Hey, Michael, if you've got it and you want to text me or something like that, you can. Huh? Oh, there's on the paper? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I apologize. I told you we're a little fast and loose today. So here's the situation on the quarterbacks. He said, this is Kirby Smart a moment ago. It's way more important to get it right, which I don't know that we've always done, than it is to do it fast. I can't put a timetable on that or a volume of plays, basically meaning, figuring out who the starting quarterback is going to be. He says that looking back, you could make the case that why didn't Stetson Bennett get more reps for 2 years, really? Why he didn't get more upon his return? Maybe we didn't manage that right, but we certainly didn't rush into it. He goes on to say the game action always matters, absolutely matters. It's the number one measure we have, and it's the one thing we can't measure because we've said over and over, we don't tackle the quarterback in practices. He says in the games, they're going to get practice. So, or I should say get tackled. So that's Kirby Smart kind of really avoiding the quarterback topic all around there on that, maybe as you expected he would. So that's the situation there on that front. All right, let me get a few more comments here, and we will roll out of here for today. And I wish we didn't have to, but we kind of do. DT is saying we've had an issue with the stream today. DT is saying we've been losing the stream on and off. DT, I appreciate the update on that. Apparently it's been going on across multiple platforms. So thank you for the update on that. South GA Dog also asking about Ra Thomas. Ra Thomas, I think we're led to believe is, obviously he had the off-field issue, earlier in the offseason, but every indication we have is that Ra is going to be a part of this team, and his legal situation's obviously been, I guess rectified. You can read more about that. I don't, necessarily have a lot of details on kind of how all that played out, but my understanding is the situation was rectified. So, from that standpoint, doesn't seem to be kind of impediment to Ra playing and being part of the team here. That does not seem to be any kind of issue. So I think it's a little bit more difficult to predict exactly what his role is going to be compared to Dominic Lovett. Lovett had the better season a year ago. Lovett would seem to be in the more defined role for Georgia here this year too, where because Lovett's a slot receiver, it sort of seems like he sort of stands above the rest of the crowd as a potential slot receiver for UGA, whereas it seems like Rabra, who is a very effective competitor, very, very respected competitor, is going to be in a competition for playing time there, maybe on the outside. And I guess that's kind of the sense that I get there on that. Hunker Down 93, excited about Saturdays in Athens being just around the corner. I'm right there with you, Hunker Down. Low Country Dog also saying the poor Vandy coach, Clark Lee, the only media folks in attendance for his session were those who were just there for the free breakfast, which is kind of funny. Let me pop over to Facebook for a moment, and we'll get ready to wrap it for today. All right, on Facebook. We'll try to do more comments tomorrow. All right, on Facebook. Ken Holcomb says Kirby takes the podium at 11:30, so I got to finish the comments by then. Yeah, we'll be well done by then. So William Camacho also reporting technical difficulties there as well. Y'all, I'm really sorry about that. I am very sorry about that. That is very frustrating. Very sorry about that. Kevin Cook talking about the idea of Mike Bobo in the I formation. Yeah, listen, I wouldn't mind seeing some of that. Obviously, nobody wants to see that full time. But I wouldn't mind seeing some of that. Brian Lindsay excited about Dejon Edwards for the upcoming season. I am there as well. Very excited about that. Philip Jordan Wells says breaking news is going to be back at QB1. Philip, I think I probably agree with you on that. Jesse Dellinger gives us a strong hot take. He says Hugh Freeze will win a national title before Brian Kelly does, which is pretty interesting. Good stuff there, Jesse. I appreciate that. Ryan Mooney, thanks for the kind words. He says, I really appreciate you and the team. Great shows and good detail on what's going on. I don't get to be on the show live very often, but I wanted to share how much I appreciate you all. Ryan, you have no idea how much that means to me. I really appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. I truly appreciate the time we get a chance to share together, whether you're talking with me live here in the comment section or just sort of listening to me talk to everybody else. One way or another, I just really appreciate you being a part of it. And tomorrow we'll come back and look forward to doing a whole lot more comments with you then. I certainly will be. Apologize, I guess we had a couple of issues today. I am certainly sorry about that. But y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews. As our buddy George on Tap said during our Golden Shoe today, check them out for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including air conditioning, getting it back to tune up. Don't let your thermostat say 98 degrees. What was that? The one thermostat showed a minute ago? That may be a boy band from the 90s. But that's not a very good temperature for your house here right now. So go ahead and get tuned back up to factory fresh specs with our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. See you back here tomorrow for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, and we'll react to more of what Georgia says at SEC Media Days today as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.